Hello everyone and welcome back to Keystone Academy. This is the second episode in our series on Adobe Premiere Pro Basics, and today we are going to talk about creating a sequence. So there are a couple ways to go about creating a sequence, and the one that I think is best because it gives you access to the most settings is by going up to File, going to New, and then clicking on New Sequence. And as you can see, there's also a keyboard shortcut right here, which is Control N or Command N on Mac. So you just click this and it will pop up this new sequence dialog box so you can customize your sequence settings. So right here is a list of presets that you can choose from. So a lot of these are kind of complicated if you don't really know what you're looking for, but most of the information that you need will be provided over here in the video and audio settings that it displays next to it. Under digital SLR or DSLR, a lot of times those are kind of the easiest settings to use because they're pretty standard, and then you can just kind of select your frame rate, your aspect ratio, and all that by choosing one of the default options. So for this, I'm choosing DSLR 1080p 30, which is 1080p at 30 frames per second. So if you go over here to your video settings, you can kind of see that in more detail. So it's telling me that I have 1920 horizontal pixels and 1080 vertical pixels, which is your standard 16:9 full high definition video quality. And then as I mentioned as well, the frame rate, as we see up here, 1080p 30, this 30 indicates the frame rate for 30 frames per second. And we can see that as well down here where it says frame rate 29.97, which is actually the standard as opposed to exactly 30 frames per second. 25 isn't really used that often. 24 is used a lot. That's more for a cinematic look. If you're going for that look for, like a short film or a documentary, something like that. But something like this where we're just using it to post to the web and for social media, 30 frames per second is just fine. So once you've selected that, you can go over to the settings to see some more detailed settings. We won't go into this too much, but this pretty much copies over all the settings from what you selected in your sequence preset. So like you saw before, it's DSLR, 29.97 frames per second, and then here you have your frame size. And this menu can be reopened at any time while you're editing in case you want to change some of your settings. So sometimes I'll start working on, say, a video for social, and I'll realize halfway through that this would be better as, say, an Instagram story instead of an Instagram post. So I'll change the frame size from a horizontal 16:9 to a vertical 9:16 so that it fits a phone vertically. So once you have all your video settings done, you can look down at audio, which shows your sample rate and display format, which we won't really go into that. I usually don't mess with this that much. And then your video previews. So as you can see, the width and height are the same as the actual video quality. So this is usually what you want to do so that your video previews are the same size as what your video will be when you export it. But it's also important to keep in mind if you're not running on a super high-powered computer that you can take down the resolution, obviously keeping the same aspect ratio, but take down the resolution. That way your videos will play a little more smoothly while you're actually editing, especially if you have a lot of effects. So once you have all these settings done, kind of how you want them, then you can go down here to sequence name and you can actually name your sequence. So we will just call this demo sequence and we will press OK. And then as you can see, it popped this sequence over here into our interview bin, which is not where we want it, but that's just because it was the last thing that I clicked on. So I actually went ahead and made a sequences bin. So what we will do is just click and drag this and drop it in our sequences bin. And as you can see over in the timeline, there is a title demo sequence, which means that's the active sequence in the timeline. So I can X out of this and go back to having no sequences in the timeline, but the sequence will still stay here in our sequences bin so I can reopen it. Another way to create a sequence, which is a little simpler but doesn't always work as well, is you can simply click and drag a clip into the timeline if there's no sequence in there. And what that does is it takes the settings from the clip that you brought over and makes those the sequence settings. So this can be really helpful if you're trying to make a sequence very easily and all of your footage has the same, resolution, aspect ratio, frame rate, but a lot of times that's not the case, so you do want to go ahead and make a custom sequence. And as you can see, like before, it made another sequence for me and it just named it after the clip that I used to create the sequence. So I'm just going to click and drag that and add it to our sequences bin. If you like this video, please drop a like and subscribe, and be on the lookout for more Premiere Pro tutorial content.